I had this idea for Mercury in 2013. I was kind of frustrated with the banking options that entrepreneurs had to use. Just felt that there was all the kind of products that we used in our daily life, both as consumers and entrepreneurs, had improved a lot, but banking was, the same thing. We, wrote down 6 cultural attributes that we really cared about, adapted those, and really hired against those, and that's made a really big difference. Apart from kind of the top 10 or so banks, the rest of the banks in the US, they don't really build software. Like, they don't build products. It just takes a lot of work to make like an amazing product. If that's not the main thing you do, like if the main thing isn't like, I'm going to continuously like think about technology and building the kind of smoothest user experience around it, it's hard to do it as like a secondary thing, which like it would be to most banks. I felt I could acquire the customers and I could build the product, but how do regulation, compliance, all of those things work was my biggest unknown.
How daunting was it for you in the environment where you started? It's 2017, right? There were some delays there. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for a Family Office Insights Luminary series. We're super excited to have Immad Akhund. Did I pronounce the last one right?
Immad Akhund. Close enough.
Great. Super thank you to Shelley Gollin, who we've known for a long time, is involved in a serious way with Mercury as well, and that's how we got involved. Full disclosure, Family Office Insights is a customer, and we've enjoyed the experience, which is one of the things we're going to talk about is when's the last time you enjoyed the experience with your bank. And I know that Mercury is not a bank, so we want to disclose that, but it's a fintech overlay to banking. And so it's been really, really interesting on a personal basis for our business to experience a use case. And so we've been delighted with it, by the way. With that, let's talk a little bit about your background, Immad.
Yeah, well, excited to join you. Let's see, my background. So I've been doing startups since 2006. I grew up in London, kind of did my first startup 1 year after kind of leaving university and kind of got addicted to the startup bug. So did one very short startup in the UK, and then I moved to America, pursued 2 startups here before Mercury. Sold my previous startup for 45 million in 2017. And then I had this idea for Mercury in 2013. I was kind of frustrated with the banking options that entrepreneurs had to use. Just felt that there was, all the kind of products that we used in our daily life, both as consumers and entrepreneurs, had improved a lot, but banking was, the same thing as has like existed in the 1990s, it felt like. So the idea was always to build kind of banking, modernize it, and over time turn into a platform where you can build more tools on top of banking.
Yeah, one of the things I noticed in your early journey as an entrepreneur, you were I think the company that you sold had to do with gaming. So you went from being somebody that was arguably talented programmer in gaming and built a company that was worthy of being acquired. You had to learn about the banking business. But let's talk a little bit about that company. What was the genesis of the gaming company?
So my previous company was called HeyZap. It went for 8 years. So from 2009 to 2017 is when I left it. And it actually had 4 full pivots. So we started with something in Flash gaming. So Flash was like this kind of online web-based gaming. And then mobile happened and iPhones became popular and almost all casual gaming moved to mobile. So we did one pivot where we ended up kind of building a social network for mobile gamers. And that didn't work. Anyway, so 2 more journeys later, eventually we built this kind of ad tech layer that made it easy for mostly game developers, but anyone could use it to plug in kind of video ads, other types of ads, and optimize them for you. And that last thing kind of worked very well. We were used by kind of 2 or 3 of the top Android and iOS games pretty much continuously in like 2015 onwards. And yeah, in general, I like doing new things over time. Like all of my startups, and even within that, like were new things, and I try to identify problems and just learn about them rather than try to approach it from like my own like box of like I know this, therefore I can only do this. If that makes sense.
Yeah. What was there was, when you were building that, was that during your Y Combinator days as well?
Yeah, well, so my last two companies, not Mercury, but HeyZap and ClickPass, were Y Combinator companies. So I did my own YC companies in 2007 and 2009. And then after I sold my previous company, I was a part-time partner at Y Combinator for a year.
I know you've commented about this, but that was a good place for you to be as a startup entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Y Combinator, especially for early entrepreneurs. I think it's pretty much a no-brainer. Obviously you get the money, but you also gonna learn a lot, and you get connected to like a network of entrepreneurs, which I think is like probably the most important thing. Just having similar people that you can learn from that are kind of doing the journey with you.
Yeah, people usually do make this question at the end in this type of interview, but one of the things that, if you don't mind commenting about, is I've heard you say that if you want to be an entrepreneur, start early. Can you talk about a little bit of that and maybe advice for aspiring entrepreneurs?
Yeah, everyone's kind of situation is obviously very personal, and I think it depends on what your situation is. You know, there are many benefits to starting early as an entrepreneur. You have less kind of personal burn rate, right? Like now I have two kids and all
Right.
these other things that,
Circumstances being what they are, right? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Uh, so I think like earlier on you have like yeah, less kind of downside to worry about. I think it's just really fun being an entrepreneur. So assuming that you would enjoy it, why spend, I guess, like if your eventual goal is like I want to start something and that's what you're passionate about, I guess why spend 10 years doing something you're not enjoying? Like life is short in many ways, and we should do the thing that we love as early as possible. So that's the second aspect. There's definitely benefits to learning, in a job and building a network of people you could start companies with. So, um, but yeah, I'm just a huge fan of being an entrepreneur. And so I think if it's for you, I think starting earlier has like lots of benefits.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of being an entrepreneur too. I've had one job in my life, and this isn't about my thoughts on things necessarily, but yeah, I've always characterized it as the Goldman Sachs trade. And you could use any big company where you could build your own brand on the back of theirs. But I told my kids, I said, look, go get a job somewhere where you can leverage the brand of somebody else, a big company, that you would connect with people that you wouldn't otherwise be able to connect with, and then bounce out and do something on your own, because now you've got a launching pad, right? And so I think there's huge value in, if your character is built in such a way that you can stomach being an entrepreneur, because as you know, sometimes it's pretty rough, right?
Oh yeah, it's very rough, but that's kind of you have to enjoy the rough parts as well.
Indeed. So speaking of rough parts, one would argue that doing what you've done with Mercury and your partners and your other founders, giving them credit where credit is due, of course, and investors, was a could have been easily dismissed attempt because of the regulatory environment that banks work in, and that if you went 10 years ago to a bank and said, hey, we're going to put an interface that is much better than the one that you have, and I know it's more than an interface, and that's going to allow you to get deposits and so on and so forth and profit like banks profit, then one would argue that you would walk away from that immediately because the task was too daunting. How daunting was it for you in the environment where you started, I guess, 2017, right? And then there were some delays there, but
um, it's it's much easier if you're not the first, and we weren't the first, right? There was a Chime had already started when Mercury started, and there was a few kind of examples in Europe, like Monzo and Revolut and N26, that had started. So you could, I mean, they were all early at that point in 2017, but you could say, okay, this is how they did it. And I'd also met a few other entrepreneurs that were a little earlier, but they'd done some of this. So I think I don't know, when I see someone else doing something, I'm like, okay, I can do it too.
Of course, yeah.
I think it would be much trickier to go, hey, I'm the first person to ever do this, right? Uh, so that was something that made me feel like, okay, it's doable. I also, I talked to a lot of people, especially lawyers. You know, is when it comes to kind of regulations, what's possible, etc. Fintech lawyers like basically can explain a lot to you, and they'll do it mostly for free when you're starting out. So I really focused on this question because I felt I could acquire the customers and I could build the product, but how do regulation, compliance, and all of those things work was my biggest unknown. So I basically spent the first, that's 7 months when I was really investigating whether I wanted to do Mercury and how to do it, just going really deep on the subject. And eventually I realized like it's hard, but it's kind of like a knowable hard, right? I think one of the things that's hard about like doing a startup from scratch is there's a lot of unknowable things, right? There's like, will people like this thing? And you have to spend a lot of time to figure out the unknowables. Whereas like risk and compliance and regulations, right? It's like defined, it's knowable. You have to do it right, and that's really important. But it's definitely not like unsurmountable. And obviously we did it, and others have also done it.
So, what do you think prevents the banks themselves from undertaking and being a Mercury? What is it that gets in their way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I thought about this one a lot as well before I started Mercury, because I was like, if you're going to do something, like you don't want to just be copied by like the incumbents really quickly. I think there's a few aspects to this. Number one, which is kind of subtle, but probably the most important, is banks make money on lenders, right? If they give you a loan, even if it's a mortgage, right, they're going to make 50K a year or something like that on the mortgage. Obviously, these loans get pretty big, especially for bigger banks that can do like big commercial loans and things like that. So, when you make money from something, that becomes like the main focus of the thing. So most banks don't think of themselves as like, I care a lot about depositors. They think of themselves like, I care a lot about lenders, and depositors are seen as like funding sources to the lending operation, which makes sense. Like that's just how banks work. Yeah. But it just means that like, they try to do the minimal possible for depositors. There's no reason for them to like go, let's make an amazing depositor experience. Like as long as they get enough deposits, and obviously most banks have a fairly similar, front end for those depositors, it doesn't matter that much to them. Like they're not trying to be excellent at like making a service for the kind of operational business bank account kind of thing. Okay. So that's, I think, the biggest reason why banks have not, if you think about it and you go there, you're like, why is this bank doing these things that seems like obviously not good, right? Like it's not that hard to build a better product or build a better customer experience. But you're just like not really their customer as a depositor. Like the lender is like the person borrowing is their real customer. That's where they make the money. So that's one thing. The second thing is, apart from kind of the top, whatever, 10 or so banks, the rest of the banks in the US, and there's about 6,500 if you include kind of credit unions, they don't really build software. Like they don't build products.
It's all outsourced, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So there's like a bunch of core providers and a few other people. But when you buy products, especially when you're institution buying a product, you're not getting the best product in terms of user experience. You're getting the thing that like again satisfies the minimum spec, and has a bunch of like kind of enterprise checkboxes and all of this kind of stuff. And it also makes it hard to copy innovation, right? There's not, a bank can't just say, let's go copy Mercury. They have to say, can you please go copy?
Like right, yeah, give it to somebody else, right, yeah.
And then a third thing, which is kind of related to that, is, yes, you could say, oh, the top 10 banks could do it. But they have such a broad kind of set of customers. It's hard. Like, part of the reason Mercury is great is because we really focus on, you know, startups and VC firms and slightly bigger organizations that have like very specific types of use cases. They really care about wires. They really care about multi-user accounts and all of this kind of stuff. A bank is, one of these top 10 banks is thinking about everything, right? They're like, okay, that's like one part, and then they have these kind of millions of consumers and all this stuff. So it's hard, when you focus down on like a niche, you can go much deeper and build a much better experience for that niche. And that's not something like a big bank would care about. So I think those are the main factors. I also think actually like it's just really hard to build a great product in fintech because there's obviously kind of the product and user experience aspect of it, but then you have to get the compliance and risk right, and you have to make that kind of user journey all the way through it really smooth. We have 2 product teams that work on just the onboarding experience, kind of the thing that the user sees and what they're filling in, and then the kind of the back end piece around like sanction screening and risk and all KYC and all of this kind of stuff. It just takes a lot of work to make like an amazing product. And if that's not the main thing you do, like if the main thing isn't like, I'm going to continuously like think about technology and building the kind of smoothest user experience around it, it's hard to do it as like a secondary thing, which like it would be to most banks.
Yeah, so focus is part of what's enabled you to focusing on to start with the VC community and their needs, right?
Yeah.
So what is it if, and you don't have to answer this, obviously, I'm not telling you what you can and can't do, but if the banks traditionally are making most of their money by lending, the borrower is the paycheck, and you're bringing in a user experience and deposits, how's Mercury making money if that's not really interesting to the deposits isn't really interesting to the bank?
So there's a set of banks that are really good at lending, but they're not always as good at acquiring deposits. So it is kind of like a marketplace, right? You need enough deposits so you can lend against them. So there's already kind of like a pre-existing network, like they're called sweep networks, where if a bank is good at lending, like maybe they're really good at agriculture lending, maybe they're really good at like commercial construction loans or something like that. If there is like a niche bank and they're good at lending, they don't necessarily have access to enough deposits to lend at the level that they could lend. So those banks in these sweep networks basically are willing to buy deposits. This isn't Mercury. Like this has existed between banks
for a long time. Yeah.
40 plus years or something. But that's how Mercury works with our partner banks. We give them deposits. They mostly put the deposits on these sweep networks. They get paid for putting the deposits on the sweep networks, and we kind of rev share with them.
The standard infrastructure and methodology that a bank would make money in deposits. So that totally makes sense. Did you have 10 banks to choose from and you picked the 2 that you're working with now?
Yeah, I mean, I actually talked to probably like 60 banks initially. The sponsor bank ecosystem is not that huge in terms of like banks that work with fintechs. I think there's probably like, I read somewhere there was like 150 or so sponsor banks out there. But yeah, we talked to a lot, and it was a combination of finding someone that obviously A, was willing to work with us, but B, had like all the kind of tech features we needed. I think we were pretty much the first kind of neobank to have wire support, which seems like not a complicated spec, but almost every neobank before us focused on consumers and like kind of mass market consumers. So that was kind of a big requirement for us to go like, hey, we need to be able to support wires because that's a feature that's important to kind of the customers we're targeting. So yeah, once you cut things down by features and scale and things like that, the universe is not necessarily huge of like the number of kind of sponsor banks we could work with. And then yeah, based on that, we found ones that we really liked.
Yeah, and by the way, the wire feature is paramount to our needs.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have it, it would kind of be a non-starter, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because yes, Mercury does a lot, but just like there's a few simple things that seem really simple to me, but like actually make a big difference, right? Like just it's online sign up, so you don't have to go walk to a bank branch, and you can send a wire without like jumping through like a ton of hoops. Which from an entrepreneur, I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem like huge, but yeah, those kind of simple things, when you do enough simple things, they kind of add up to being a big kind of improvement for users.
So, and maybe it's just my perception, and you tell me whether this is more than whether it's a general perception, is that entrepreneurs are not really thinking about banking. It's just a necessary utility. Is that pretty much what your experience is? They're just saying, okay, I have to do this somehow. I'll go to my banker that does my personal work and figure out whether they have a business platform. Is it largely a sort of a second thought?
I think it depends what type of entrepreneur you are, in the sense that, so some entrepreneurial communities are much kind of tight and knit, and most people who start like a tech startup, they generally know other people who are also like tech founders, right? Not always, but often. And it's similar with like e-commerce companies, right? There's a lot of like these kind of online communities nowadays where like before someone even starts something, they're like part of a community and then they learn from it. And I think for those people that are in these like tight knit communities of entrepreneurs, they tend to mostly rely on recommendations, where they're like, okay, it's not just banking, right? Like there's if you think about like when you're starting a business, it's like incorporation, banking, payroll, accounting. Those are probably like the main things you have to set up initially. And yeah, there's lots of like most people when they start those things that say, okay, who should I use? And that's where most of our growth comes from. Even now, half of our growth comes from kind of word of mouth, organic usage, and it's mostly based on these kind of recommendations. There's definitely a set of people that just say, okay, I've banked with, X since I was 18 for my personal side. I'll just set up a business account with them. But I would say often those are not necessarily like tech entrepreneurs, or maybe they're very early in their entrepreneurship, and they often move, then later on when they raise money, they would move to something like Mercury, just because we cater to their needs a lot better.
Yes, without being disparaging about what happened to SVB and how sad that was, and that event, did that event open some people's eyes, not just about all the stuff that went on and difficulty in the banking system, but did that help Mercury in terms of deposits and that sort of thing?
Yeah, SVB was our main competitor, right? When we started Mercury, they were the 800-pound gorilla, and like they were on the slide deck going like, "Oh, this is SVB, and the market cap is 20 billion."
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah, okay, yeah.
But by the time I guess 2023 came along, we already kind of 4 years into doing Mercury, and at least for the early stage startup ecosystem, we were already kind of the main alternative to SVB. There was definitely like an initial kind of bump in deposits. I think it was around 2 billion. And yeah, we were catering to the same customer segment. So obviously we had to kind of work on making sure, people felt safe using Mercury, because, obviously at that point, there was a lot of worries around like, oh, who's next if SVB is failing and things like that. And we did that by kind of extending our FDIC insurance. Like pretty much that week, we extended it from 1 million to 5 million across both our partner banks. And yeah, since that moment, our market share, especially with this kind of early stage startup community, has grown quite a lot. So yeah, we kind of it was an initial bump, but then kind of we've also been growing faster in the last year.
So there's lots of features which we don't have the time to talk about, but what I'd like to have you comment on, if it's okay, is like Mercury. Is it called Mercury Raise? You talk a little bit about that.
Launched Mercury Raise. I guess it's been 3 years since we ran it first. The idea really came from the fact that like I would speak to a lot of our customers that were entrepreneurs, and they'd as you can imagine, when you speak to entrepreneurs, they're often like, "Oh, we're fundraising. Like, which investors do you know that like we could speak to?" Uh, and I tried to be helpful, but it was hard to kind of do that for like
And run Mercury at the same time, right? Yeah.
so.
It's a bandwidth issue, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then I realized that Mercury had like a pretty unique thing in the sense that we had a lot of kind of these early stage entrepreneurs that wanted to raise money, and they were building interesting things. And if we could connect them to investors, we could be quite helpful, and it would be helpful to investors as well to see like what are new things coming, and we had like a unique kind of deal flow. So that was the first Mercury raise, which was, we would pick some companies. Companies would apply. We would pick the top ones, and we would then share them out to kind of a set of investors that we've grown over time. So we're still doing that. We do that monthly, and mostly seed stage companies, some Series A's, and I think we have like more than 500 investors on the platform.
And the investors are VCs generally?
Angels, seed funds. It's mostly seeds, not necessarily like the bigger VCs. But some of the bigger VCs also do seed nowadays. And then we've added a few other pieces to the Raise program. We also have kind of a community of, as I was talking about earlier, founders often know each other. So we have a community. It's mostly on Slack, where founders can talk to each other, and we run programs for them. And we also do like kind of mentoring type things where we connect the founders to mentors. So that's kind of what, overall we think of Mercury Raise as like, hey, let's try to be really helpful to these entrepreneurs that use Mercury, and investors, connecting them with investors, connecting them with each other, and connecting them with mentors is like a good way to do that.
And you have customers, I believe, that are VCs as well. That are is there a metric you can share? Is half of your depositors VCs and the other half entrepreneurs? Is it?
Oh, there's not that many VCs out there. So it's about 5% of our customers are kind of VC funds, or some of them are hedge funds, but generally VC funds are the biggest. Tends to be kind of more emerging managers. Just obviously, if you have like $1 billion fund, you have like more complex kind of needs around capital call lines and things like that, which we don't provide. We really focus on this kind of operational bank account. But we have a bunch of cool features that are useful for VCs. So you can set up, we have some VCs that have like 20 accounts on Mercury, and you can switch between all of your accounts very easily. You can move money between the accounts really easily. And obviously, because the wires are really smooth and easy,
It's incredible. Yeah.
Sending one as an investor. I'm also a pretty active investor, but before Mercury, it used to be so painful if you have to like send a wire to to do an investment. Now it's like very smooth. Yeah, so we have like these kind of features that we've kind of targeted fund administrators with as well.
Yeah, the experience of wiring money and moving money between accounts is seamless. It's really head and shoulders above anything else that we've experienced, and I know you have a lot of people feel the same way. So I'll just say it again. Thank you for doing that. Right? Just
yeah. We also have a kind of a corporate credit card as well. That's all kind of built into the banking service. So a lot of things we've built in the last 2 years have been kind of, we basically got to a stage where we're like, okay, this is a bank account. It's fairly complete, and there's always things to build and improve, but it felt fairly complete. But my plan was always, once you have kind of this banking service, there's just a ton you can build on top of it. So we started with credit cards, and that's been doing nicely. And then this year we announced bill pay, and in a month or two we're launching invoicing. We kind of think about the bank account as this kind of platform. It has all your money, it has all your kind of employees and finance team using it. Yeah, you can add a lot more kind of features and controls around around all these kind of services if it's all integrated into your banking.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about some of the new things that you've done, and then what's sort of in the offing that you can talk about.
Yeah, so I guess I'll talk about this first. So, we called it kind of our financial workflows launch. So we launched Bill Pay, which is you can upload a PDF, either you can drag it in or you can forward an email. We'll OCR the PDF, and then you can set up a payment, and then you can set up a custom approval flow. So it can be like if it's about 100,000, the CFO has to approve it and the CEO has to approve it. Yeah, and you can set up all these kind of payment rules. So that's bill pay. And then later this year, well, just next couple of months, we're launching invoicing. So you can generate an invoice and send it off. It makes a PDF, and you can also collect money. And employee reimbursement. So right now we give you kind of corporate credit cards, and you can give your employees corporate credit cards. But if someone does spend using their personal credit card, or maybe you don't feel comfortable giving all your employees kind of access to a corporate credit card, then they can upload the receipt and get it reimbursed. But the cool thing is it'll all be integrated as part of Mercury. So there's no extra service to set up, and the money will flow much faster. So like normally when you use some external bill pay, you have to wait a couple of days for them to get the money and then they send it out. But it's kind of, I've always imagined if you were going to make a modern bank account, like what would you put inside it? And it isn't necessarily just all the things that existed like 20 years ago. I think it's going to be a whole set of tools you build on top of it. And that's kind of what we're building.
Yeah, generally you're going and using another utility outside and then have to bring it back in for reporting. Yeah, the integration is super valuable. I can totally see that.
And then the other thing we actually launched in April is Mercury Personal. So basically giving these kind of same tools around banking and to kind of personal bank accounts. And mostly initially we're targeting our existing customers, so kind of entrepreneurs and VCs and investors. But it's been really fun. Like I've been using it since December. I've moved my whole life to it. But it's really easy. Like I have a PA that I gave a bank account to, and she can pay my bills, but needs approvals and all of these kind of things that these kind of power user features that we've created on the business side, actually kind of nice to have on the personal side as well. Like even this like OCRing a PDF, like nowadays, if I receive a personal bill or like I'm investing, I'll just drag in the PDF, it'll OCR it, and then I can like make the payment really easily. It's nice to be able to kind of take these kind of business power user tools and use them as a personal user as well.
It's super cool. Is there anything else cooking in the future that you can talk about? I mean, you probably have a great big roadmap, but anything you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, we launched a lot of things this year, and I guess there's a couple more launches left. So I think a lot of the next kind of 12-ish months will be around kind of listening to our customers around those features and like improving them over time. So like on the personal banking side, we're working on joint accounts right now. On the business side, we have a product called Mercury Treasury, which lets you kind of put, extra money that you have into kind of US government T-bill, mutual funds, and things like that. We'll probably be launching that feature on the personal side as well. But yeah, I think the next kind of 6 months is really like taking all these things that we launched and listening to customers and kind of continuing to improve them.
Yeah, super. I'm sure it's endless what people are asking for, but prioritizing for sure. What if are you willing to share? Entrepreneurs, especially, and investors also tend to like to hear about, holy cow, we made this big mistake. Don't do that, right? Can you talk a little bit about stuff that sort of went off the rails, or had you had a chance to have the information that you have now, would have done differently, like along the journey?
I made a ton of mistakes in my previous startups, and I tried to learn from them at Mercury. So mostly at Mercury, I think I had a smaller set of the basic mistakes. But I'll talk about some of the basic mistakes I made at my previous startups. I think one thing which like is a weird, it's hard to like get this one right as an early entrepreneur is actually picking a good idea, right? I think there's this like one piece of advice that people say. It's like, hey, the idea doesn't matter, just execution matters. But at least my experience has been, with Mercury, I think the idea was really good and the timing was really good for the idea. And that's a lot of the reason it's successful. Obviously, it took a lot of work, but I think without a good idea, it doesn't matter if you do a lot of work.
Yeah.
My previous startups, I took 4 full pivots before we got to a good idea. And I wish I'd like probably at each point where I did the pivot, I wish I just stepped back and gone a lot further in like validating and thinking about ideas and thinking really broadly about them. Like I think it's very easy when you're thinking about an idea to go like, oh, I know, like in that company, it was like, oh, we know about game developers. Let's do this for game developers. Like they tended to be kind of incremental steps of ideas. They weren't like hey, actually, I really care about this really broad problem. Let's go try to solve that or understand this industry and things like that. So I think that's one advice that I would give early entrepreneur that like actually probably spend a little bit more time thinking about the idea, maybe explore them a little deeper before committing in one idea. I think I could have done that a lot better before. The second piece of advice is, in my previous company, we really cared about uh, having a high kind of hiring bar. Like we would really make sure you were a great engineer or a great salesperson. And I think we were good at like filtering for that. But we didn't do a good job of filtering for culture. So we didn't really understand what type of personalities we wanted to hire and why we cared about what we cared about. And then we just ended up with like a real mash of different people, like some really loud and some quiet, and like it didn't work very well as like a cohesive culture. I mean, it worked, but it wasn't like somewhere I was like, okay, this is like an amazing culture and I'm proud to kind of work here. At Mercury, we were much more deliberate about it. We kind of, wrote down kind of 6 cultural attributes that we really cared about pretty much in the first kind of few months. And we've, adapted those and really hired against those and encouraged those kind of throughout. And that's made a really big difference.
That sounds really hard. Like how do you identify people in an interview process? It's more of a rhetorical question, but it sounds really hard in an interview process that will fit into your culture. Wow.
Right. Like I think if you firstly you like write down what do you care about. Yeah, we have 6 things we care about, and some of them are much easier to identify than others, right? So one of them is think actively. uh and there we're really looking for like curious people that go really deep in things that they care about. And I would say that one is not that hard to identify, right? There's like you can ask someone a question about what they did previously or what they studied or like what did they do outside work, and then you just keep asking them a few more questions, and like you can, you know, people who are curious and like think a lot about what they're doing, like they can go very deep in like things that they cared about, things that they worked on. Uh, I think other things are trickier, but you kind of develop kind of questions and like other aspect ways of like noticing them. So uh, another thing we care about is like looking for kind of humble, low ego people. And if you ask someone like, oh, what's something you accomplished before? Like humble, low ego people will kind of go like, hey, we did this together.
Instead of I, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can tell by the way someone talks about like how, I really hate like making a big deal of my accomplishments because like it doesn't, I want to be like, I try to underplay most things I do. And sometimes my wife finds that annoying, but I think it's just like, I find it uncomfortable being like to like, oh, look at how good I am, that kind of thing. And I think that's true for like a lot of kind of humble, low ego people. But anyway, so once you identify like the things that you care about, you can generally come up with kind of exercises and questions to like test against them. But yeah, it really does come from like step one is good identification, and then being like very deliberate and having like this intent to go like I care about this and I'll filter on that.
Yeah, the self-effacing characteristic of people is especially if it's authentic, is endearing. You know, people don't like boisterous, narcissistic type embellishments.
Well, I should be clear, like, some things can work in some companies and not in others, right? Early Uber culture, it's like
Yeah.
Uber, the company.
Yeah.
At least from the outside, it seems like it was very competitive, very like, a very kind of like
Run through walls, right?
yeah, exactly. And that probably is like a higher ego culture, and it worked for them, and they were successful. I think it's more about like picking something that's true for you, that works well for the type of product you're building, and then you can kind of live with, like having a good kind of opinion about it, and then sticking with it is the important part.
Yeah, and it's not a good sample set, but as you know, Family Office Insights and Mercury have a series where we try to help some of the entrepreneurs that Shelley and Puya selected to come and present to the investor community of Family Office Insights, and some of it's business development as well for them, the entrepreneurs. But so far the candidates who've been served up by Shelley and Puya have been, really thoughtful, smart type folks that we like having, because the community appreciates having that type of opportunity to look at. And it's always a nicer experience for somebody like me, where somebody's thoughtful, methodical, realistic, and so that's so far. So maybe that culture is bled into your customers. Let's just say.
I hope so, but all customers are welcome, though. You don't have to have just this culture. I'm fine with the next Uber using Mercury too.
Yeah. Just to finish that thought, we've really enjoyed having them, and look forward to continuing to do that with some of the groups that with the intent of having not only the entrepreneurs benefit from engaging the Family Office Insights community for whatever reason, investment or business development, but it also gives us an opportunity during those interviews, and some of them are pitches, where they can talk about their experience with Mercury. So I think it all helps in terms of Mercury business development as well. So far, it's been really interesting for us anyway. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the group before we wrap it up?
No, I don't think so. This was a fun conversation. If people are interested in kind of the normal Mercury on the business side, just feel free to sign up. It's on mercury.com. If you're interested in kind of Mercury personal, it's still got a wait list, but maybe if they can get an introduction to Shelley, we can try to get them off the wait list.
I love that. Is the wait list because of capacity, like bandwidth? That's probably not the right word.
Yeah, we just, it's a new program, and we just want to scale it fairly deliberately and carefully. Like, we don't need to get to like millions of users in 1 year or anything. So we're rolling it out, and we're just making sure everything works, and we scale our kind of customer support and ops and give everyone this kind of amazing experience they're used to.
Yeah, the experience, this is like the third time I said it, but, aside from Shelley and I being friends, and the onboarding was like, what, that is done, right? It is really a seamless type process, which is, arguably a lot better than, even the big banks who have their own tech, they haven't figured it out, right? Yeah. So, well, I super appreciate you doing this.
Good meeting you.
Yeah, very nice meeting you. Maybe we can do it again sometime as things roll out here, and we get an update to the group and the community. And as always, folks, thanks for watching Family Office Insights Luminary Series and participating today. And thanks again to Shelley and Puya and the whole team at Mercury. And we look forward to keeping the relationship going and helping things out with Mercury. We love it. Thanks so much, Immad.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Take care.